2. All right, we are live. Hello and welcome everyone to another Chat and Learn here with Power to Fly. My name is Mariella Marie, and as always, super excited to roll into this next hour with you all. Our guest speaker is calling from the Netherlands today, and I know she's going to drop a lot of knowledge and share a lot of resources. As I said before we started recording, this is a very timely conversation, and we want to make sure that your questions are being answered. If anyone has any questions that come up in the moment, please drop those in the chat box. Any tips and tricks of your own, again, drop those in the chat box as well. Before we get kicked off, I just want to go over some quick housekeeping rules so that we all feel comfortable and confident in this next hour. I like to remind folks, you could be doing anything else with your time. So I really appreciate you all joining us live, for those of you who are here live with us. And then for those of you who are rewatching this chat, thank you so much for taking time to listen in there. So if you're live with us, we'd love for you to participate, and you can participate in a number of ways. You can turn your camera on if you feel called to do so. This is a safe virtual space. I'm not afraid to kick folks out if you're being disrespectful. I really want to hear everyone's voice here who's taking the time out of their schedules to join us. So participation is key. You can participate by turning your cameras on. You can write in the chat box, any tips and tricks of your own, any reflections, any questions that come to mind. We've got a full hour today, so we want to make sure that we are really maximizing our time here. So I've muted everyone upon entrance just to avoid any background noise, but I can't stress enough, please feel free to hop off mute whenever you have something you'd like to share. And let's just try to have one person off of mute at a time, just so that we can make sure that we hear everyone and everyone's voice is being heard. Now, if you hop off mute, you will be featured in our live recording as this is being recorded. And those of you who signed up for this chat, you will be getting a rewatch email with links to resources that will also include a link to this video so that you all can share it with your community, your coworkers, your family, friends, and you can even rewatch it yourself and vigorously take notes there. So as I said, this is being recorded, and you'll get a rewatch email with the link to this chat. If anyone has any sensitive information and you prefer to be kept anonymous, that is all good. You can find me in the chat box under Mariella Marie, and you can write to me privately there, and I'll make sure that I'll raise your question or your reflection to our guest speaker and keep you anonymous. All right, the last thing I'll say is we'd love for you to follow Power to Fly on socials and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can keep up with all the great chats we've got in store. And if this is your first chat where I am moderating, I'll just take a couple seconds to introduce myself. So I'm currently in Argentina and Patagonia. I'm originally from California, and I love speaking about the importance of emotional intelligence and finding ways and how we can deepen our emotional intelligence at home and in the workplace. So if anyone is interested of philosophizing there and figuring out how we can develop our EI, which they say is a soft skill, which I would argue, maybe it's not so soft these days. We need to practice more and more. Feel free to philosophize with me there on EI. Otherwise, you're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. And I also invite you to support the project that I'm working on that is called the Positive Force Team. You can go to thepositiveforceteam.org and sign up for our newsletter. And without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic now to our guest speaker who is calling from the Netherlands today. Kay, let us know a little bit about yourself, how you came to learn about Power to Fly, and what you're excited to share with us today.
Well, thank you so much. And it's so wonderful being here today. And so how do I come to know about this beautiful podcasts and interviews that you're organizing? Well, simply because you're doing so much in the area of diversity and advancing inclusion and giving a voice to underrepresented groups. So certainly in terms of my work, I've come across and am a follower of you. And then hand in hand with the publication of the book Beyond D&I, Leading Diversity with Purpose and Inclusiveness, the PR agency Fortier immediately made contact with you, and we've come together this evening for me.
Beautiful. So I know you're going to share more about your journey as it relates to maybe your personal journey or your career journey as you roll into your response for some of these questions. So, but before we roll into our questions, I'd love for you to set the stage for our conversation today. So can you talk about today's key themes just to set the stage, and then we'll roll into the live Q&A.
Wonderful. So what we're going to be talking about today is an ingredient, actually two ingredients that are so incredibly important for advancing diversity, moving the diversity needle. The first one is the top skills, and I'm going to be really concentrating on what we call the soft skills of inclusive leaders. And when we look at inclusive leadership, it's being really regarded as one of the most important capabilities of any organization as we move into this next period of time. So we'll be talking about that. The next area that we're going to be talking about are the elements that are important for diversity performance to date. Leaders, organizations have focused on two of the five elements. They're focused on diversity dimensions, such as age and race and acquired dimensions, and they've looked at inclusion, which is how do you create an environment that is welcoming. But what is so important is that to advance diversity performance, you need three others. And that is creating an environment where equity and fairness is present. It is critical to really have committed leaders who are part and parcel of what is being happening. And last but not least, it is ensuring that there is a purpose that is resonating with the whole organization. So we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to be talking about some of the practices to create an inclusive environment that leaders can be done, a safe environment where you can bring yourself to your work environment and bring your talents so that they can fly. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And to your question, so where's my passion coming from? Well, I grew up in South Africa during the apartheid era. And for those who may not know, apartheid was a system that was present in South Africa, and it's actually legalized discrimination on the basis of race. And certainly growing up in that environment, I know that I was deeply impacted because you see the anguish that it occurs. And at the same time, I had the privilege of attending one of the very few multiracial boarding schools. I went there at a tender age of 10, and my colleagues, my students, my family actually were people from all colors of the rainbow across Africa, also from within South Africa. So at a very early age, I was deeply, deeply curious about what is it that compels people to discriminate, have stereotypes. And I specialized in an area which is called the neuroscience of unconscious bias. What is it in our mind and carved by society that tends to segregate people into in and out groups? And then I was very, very inspired, obviously, through the story of Mandela and seeing how he healed a lot of the divisions. Another area of interest and research is what are the traits of inclusive leaders? And that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for setting up the stage. And I personally am interested in continuing this conversation because I know that an hour is not enough to just pick your brain and share, the knowledge and the resources that you have today. So again, thank you for being transparent with us and sharing, why you're passionate about this topic. And I hope that folks can be inspired from your journey. And I know that as you answer some of these questions, you're going to be able to share more of your journey. So our audience, really, really appreciates that transparency piece, and that empathy piece and being vulnerable. So you have full permission to share as much as you want here today. We are definitely appreciative of you sharing time with us. Before we get started, I just want to shout out where folks are calling from so that you can see where we are in the world. So as I mentioned, Kay is in the Netherlands today. I am in Argentina. We've got El Paso, Texas joining. We've got the UK. We've got Northern Virginia, San Jose, California, Los Angeles, Toronto, Ontario, Buenos Aires, Argentina. Great. So, if you're just joining us, please go ahead and drop in the chat box. Let us know where you are in the world because, clearly, this is a very important conversation. We are spread out all over the globe. And I think that this is one of the things that keeps me hopeful, at least, is the power of digital community and how we can try to build bridges instead of building walls. So with that said, we're going to roll into these questions that you all have submitted previous to the conversation. If you hear your question come up and you're here with us today, please let us know so we can make sure that we get your question answered. If you weren't able to submit a question previous to this conversation, by all means, drop those questions in the chat box or hop off mute. We want to hear from you. We also want to hear some of your own tips and tricks or resources that you have to approach and pull apart this meaty conversation. So with that said, Kay, let's start with this first question here. How do you connect with remotely located team members who come from diverse backgrounds?
What I like about this question is the focus on who come from diverse backgrounds. And it's important because there is a lot of literature talking about during COVID and how do you reach out. And yet I think it is really important when we're asking that question and for leaders of organizations to understand that in this environment where we're needing to connect out remotely, there are underrepresented groups who are really battling through COVID. And let me give you some stats. So let's start with gender, women. What you see that 70% of health and social service staff, women are on the front lines. And as a result, with a higher rate of becoming sick and needing to contend with their work on the front line and the responsibilities that they have at home. If you look in terms of people of color, and I will just look at the United States for the moment, is what you see is that the research is showing that the jobs held by Black Americans are more vulnerable to loss, and that in fact, what you see is that there is a basis point difference of Black Americans who've lost their jobs versus white Americans. So that there is a 4% difference. If you look at the LGBTQI plus community, you are seeing that there is a 1.4 more likeliness to cite acute challenges and struggles associated with workplace connectivity and belonging. And in fact, the recent research has shown that 2 out of 3 LGBTQ1 plus employees acknowledge experiencing acute or moderate challenges with mental health issues right now. And if you then look at people, persons with seen and unseen disabilities, what you're seeing that workers with disabilities are losing their jobs. 1 in 5 with disabilities versus 1 to 7 in the general population. So now with that background, you can imagine that underrepresented groups are coming to the table with more acute mental health care issues, insecurity, anxiousness, and it is so important to reach out. So how do you reach out? Well, I'm going to start with one thing that might seem really basic, and yet there are so many organizations that are not asking that. Do the employees actually have the devices, the Wi-Fi, the infrastructure to be reached out to? And that is the first thing to be doing. Can I connect with you? Do you have that device? What support do you need? Because often we jump into the things that we can do in terms of virtually connecting. And certainly there is a percentage, people estimate at 20%, who can't even be reached out to because we haven't asked that question. So let's assume now that your employees have a device and you're able to reach out. So what can you do? Well, one of the key practices that is important is to carry on having interaction. And I would distinguish 2 interaction points. The one is business as usual. Instead of attending a meeting, actually attending a virtual meeting, and always start in terms of a check-in. How are you doing? Creating in advance an agenda for the meeting, inviting people to contribute to the meeting, etc. But in addition to those points, it is important to keep on having the celebratory, I call the celebratory meetings around diversity, around inclusion, communities, gathering, where the agenda is not so much about what are we going to do in the organization and let's get back to our operational, activities, but it is also having that room where you allow people to simply connect. And I was doing some research to people who are actually participating virtually in various meetings, and all of them said, you know what I miss? I miss the conversations at the coffee machine. I miss the opportunity as you're leaving a meeting to just have the side discussion. And as a result, what is really important is to create these moments where people don't have an agenda in terms of to do and work, but simply have the opportunity for dialogue. And a way to do that is create connection times through Zoom, for example. You've got this beautiful opportunity to annotate and use the whiteboard and to have breakout rooms and simply put questions out there. How are you doing? What would be helpful to you? What are you missing? What are the connection points that you'd want? And last but not least, and before moving to our next question, what I do need to say from a leadership perspective is that we see that the allocation of people to strategic projects is really impacting underrepresented groups. Because what is happening is that when you are at the work office, you are having reminders constantly when you're seeing people to give them an opportunity and bring them in. But in fact, out of sight, out of mind. So there needs to be a different way of strategically allocating people to projects, and also to ensure that the sponsorship and the mentoring roles are continuing. So I could spend the whole hour talking about this, but I suppose that in a nutshell.
Well, thank you so much for that thoughtful response. And we've actually have Jose who's dropping some links in the chat box that speak exactly to what you're saying, the impact of COVID, as it relates to vulnerable groups. So definitely click around on those links, folks, if you are here live with us, so that you can dive in deeper to what Kay is saying. And actually, this is a great moment to remind folks, Kay, if folks are interested in connecting with you when we finish this conversation, what's the best way to connect? Maybe people want to continue to pick your brain, or ask you more deeper questions that they didn't get a chance to ask today. What's the best way to connect with you?
Thank you very much. And we'll put it in the link, and I actually put it on the chat at the start of the meeting. There is a site which is called beyonddiversityandinclusion.com. And on that site, there is an opportunity to sign up for newsletters, or send a direct request to myself, or to learn more about the research, or to learn about tools and techniques. So I would say that is almost the portal. And it also has links to a YouTube channel where we're talking about each of these elements.
Great. I love that you highlight access. I find that especially now, the digital divide is growing at a tremendous rate. And I personally feel overwhelmed with the research that is, offering itself up. And of course, there's so much research that hasn't even started to happen with respect to the digital divide. So I love that, you said this might sound basic, but it's so important. And I think that when you start to travel and live, in different places in the world, you do see that, there is a big digital divide. And actually, with remote work, one tip that I would give, if you have the privilege to work remotely and you decide to live wherever, that doesn't give you the right to just stay behind your computer and in your home. Please go out in the streets and get to know people. Like you said, this face-to-face conversation that we are kind of, lacking, essentially, just to be able to connect with each other on a human basis. And, stop scrolling, stop clicking and buying things, in every moment, and go out there and get to know someone different, especially if you're able to work remotely and live in different places. So that's just my little tidbit there.
Thank you. Absolutely.
All right, so let's move on to this next question here. And folks, if you're live with us after this question, I'm going to hold for a light pause to see if someone would like to hop off mute and voice a question or reflection. So be looking out for that invitation. All right, Kay, so this question reads, can you give some examples of inclusive and exclusive leadership?
Absolutely. Once again, just always wanting to give the background to it so that there is a sense of how important inclusive leadership is. There has been extensive research which actually shows that leaders, and we're not just talking about the CEO or the board, but we're talking about any person who has a team, that their daily behaviors and the rituals and their practices have a 70% impact in terms of how people perceive the environment to be as inclusive or not. And the extent to which people observe their leaders and then conclude that they are part of an inclusive environment that has an impact in terms of evaluating themselves as being part of a collaborative team. It has an impact on saying we've got good decision making. It has an impact in terms of their health and the extent to which they're absent from work or not. So, this question is important because these activities that I'm going to be talking about and actions actually have a pronounced impact in terms of the feeling of inclusiveness and people's wellness. Now, some of examples of an inclusive leader. An inclusive leader is someone who is deeply and authentically committed about diversity and talks about it, and not so much as diversity is important for our organization because we'll deliver more bottom line performance. It's always personal. I believe in diversity because it's very much aligned to my values of respect. It's aligned to my values that everyone should have a fair chance. So it is a very personal. Authentic leaders and inclusive leaders are those who are very, very interested about their bias and are spending time understanding what are some unwitting biases or talent blind spots that they have and attempt to regulate that by being very humble about asking for feedback. These are the leaders who say, I know that despite my best intentions, that I may unwittingly exclude or show a bias. I ask you, please, to give me feedback. Inclusive leaders are those who will never allow a moment to occur when there was a discriminatory action or when there was a bias or someone was excluded to not intervene. And they don't intervene like a parent-child. They intervene with humility. And they say something like, I feel like I'd like to say something. Perhaps we could do this. Perhaps we could better listen to one another and piggyback on their ideas. Those type of things. Inclusive leaders are those who are curious. They're good listeners, and they have a tolerance for ambiguity. And why I'm saying that is when you've got a leader who believes that leadership is knowing all the answers, and that leadership will be evaluated by always having the answer, they have a very low tolerance for ambiguity. But those leaders who say, I know a lot, but not everything, and I'm deeply curious about the perspective of others, and I would like to invite that out and echo it and feed it back and create circumstances to piggyback. So all of these are things that inclusive leaders do. And exclusive leaders is a little bit on the other side, but I'd like to pick some practices. Many, many people are becoming very anxious about diversity and feeling that it's window dressing, because what they're seeing is leaders who talk about diversity and the importance, but don't live it in their actions. And they sort of feel that this is a window dressing and that there is not a honest connection about learning and contributing. And so non-inclusive leaders are those who tend to allocate a core group around them who are probably quite homogeneous, mini-me's, to their projects, who do not invite people in, who are not curious to learn, who don't spend time learning about their own biases.
Why do you think that is? Do you think that people are afraid afraid to lose money, afraid to tap into their vulnerability? I mean, I would, just because you have this beautiful background of, the neuroscience of unconscious bias that I feel like should be something that we all learn about and study at some point of our lives. If you could go deeper and respond to that, why are people doing this performative allyship?
Yeah. So there are a number of reasons. In the top words that cause people most discomfort, diversity is in that top 10. And the reason that it is in the top 10 is for the feeling for some people, which says, who am I to even talk about diversity? Maybe I belong to that group that is supposed to have all the privilege and the power, and I feel guilty to even say that I'm interested in this. Others actually would like to lean in, and they are scared, deeply scared. And they're scared because they have a feeling that they're going to say something that is not politically correct, that they're going to be taken to task. And so they almost feel safer just standing on the sidelines. Yet other people are deeply concerned about what diversity might mean for their privileges. So the question I often get asked is, but what happens to me about my opportunities into the future? And other people, but I have to say, I see it as a decreasing, are people who come from an environment which is either deeply racist or a background where it makes it very difficult to get involved. So I think there are all these roles. And if you had to ask me from a neuroscience perspective, what we must never forget in terms of this fine working of our brain is that there is a very survival technique that has gone down 10,000 years ago and is still present today, that within a second, we identify with an in-group or an out-group. And our in-group, we feel safer, we are more compassionate, we are more empathetic, and we are more willing to take chances and risks. And that is a reality. And also our brain is this fast-moving, nimble organ that likes being efficient. And so what we do is we lean on our simplified, often incorrect rules we call synopsis, hardwiring. And so we need to be very prudent and reflective about what's happening in our mind.
We could totally talk for days about this. So I'm going to be sure to connect with you personally by using that link that you dropped in the chat box so that I can pick your brain a little more. But just for the sake of time, I want to see if someone would like to hop off mute and ask a question or voice a reflection before we move on to the previously submitted question. So I'll hold for a light pause to see if someone would like to take that opportunity. If so, now's your time. Please hop off mute.
Hi, I don't know if you can hear me, it's Jose.
Yes.
Me
Hello,
again.
Jose.
Yeah, I did quite a lot of work back in the 80s and 90s with, later became Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. And what was fascinating was what he came out with this thinking fast and slow. And that's exactly what you were talking about, is we tend to respond instantaneously. It's efficient, it's cheap, and it's survival. But we actually need to learn to hold back and reflect so that we actually can get over our biases and accept other humans as equals. That's really all I wanted to say.
Ah, Jose, you say it beautifully. And for everyone who's on this beautiful gathering, the book that Jose is referring to by Kahneman, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, is an absolute read. And there is hope. Many people ask me, so Kay, now you've studied the brain, and so much of our brain is hardwiring that we've developed during our life. Is there anything we can do about it if there's such a compelling default for survival and efficiency? And I always say the beauty is that our brain is plastic. We call it neuroplasticity. Until the last breath that we have on this world, our brain is working and developing new connections. And the second one is that there is part of our brain, while 95% is unconscious and really relying on this hard wiring that Jose spoke about. There is our system in our brain that can overcome our biases, but it takes energy, it takes reflection, it takes time, it's slowing down, and it takes these important reminders in the organization and that we can take personally to slow down when we're having a gut feeling about someone and saying, hey, Kay, this is your gut intuition. Perhaps it's right, perhaps it's wrong, but now let's slow down and let's once again, with curiosity, look at this person and how they can support our organization.
Thank you so much for hopping off mute. And I'm going to be extending that invitation a little later as well, because as you see, we want to hear from you. What you have to say is important. And I love the perspectives that we can all bring to the table together here and, dissect together and hopefully support each other. With that said, I'm encouraging everyone here to network here in the chat box. So as this is such a complex topic and we only have a short amount of time, I encourage you all to drop your preferred links of connecting in the chat box. Of course, connect with our guest speaker and also amongst yourselves, because clearly you all are interested in this topic. So, maybe you can reach out to a couple of folks and support their projects or connect on their social networks, whatever their preferred social networks are. So I'll be sure to drop some things in the chat box as well. Until then, let's move on to this question here. What are the top 3 soft skills necessary to navigate as a leader in the new age of remote teams?
So when I saw the questions, I thought about it a long time, because we all like our lists of 6 and things like that. And once again, just that we all have the vocabulary. Soft skills are character traits, and that positively affect how you work and interact with others. And soft skills relate to your emotional intelligence and natural ability to interact well with others. There are many soft skills, and I will list my top 3. The first one is empathy. So empathy is defined as the ability to sense other people's emotions, coupled with the ability to imagine what someone else might be thinking or feeling. And actually, in a Forbes article of 2019, they actually had a article entitled "Empathy is no longer a soft skill for leaders." And I agree, it's such a critical one. Now, with our whole talent becoming so much more diverse, and especially when you look at the 6 generations of people, talent that we are interacting with, this ability to say, I wish to sense what other people are thinking about and what they might be feeling is so critical, and critical to being a good ally, critical to be an inclusive leader. It is not having the spotlight always on yourself, which says, how am I thinking, how I'm feeling? But it's opening that light to others and acknowledging them not only with the mind, but with the heart and the will. The second one, and it's very related, is open-mindedness. And this is the ability to be open to new ideas, experience, theories. It's also about adopting a fair and respectful attitude towards opinions and beliefs and practices that are different to one's own. So open-mindedness relates a little bit to that trait that I talked about, inclusive leaders, which talks about tolerance for ambiguity. It is this preparedness to have a space to reflect. And last but not least, and I feel that it is a very neglected soft skill for today, is curiosity. And curiosity is defined as a state of active interest or genuinely wanting to know more about something. And if you don't mind me speaking about this vis-a-vis diversity, when I speak to many people of underrepresented groups, they sometimes say to me, the curiosity that I feel from the leaders as if I am an exotic type of insect. It's almost like you are kind of a researcher looking down quite clinically. That's not the curiosity I mean. The curiosity that I mean is a curiosity that is bedded down in humanity. It's not about looking at something clinically. It's looking at with curiosity in terms of the mind and the heart and the will. So those would be the three that I would put at number 1, 2, and 3. I would be so interested from the audience, maybe in the chat, and you can look at it, what they would say are the number 1, 2, 3.
Absolutely. That's a great question to pose to our live callers. Please let us know. If you can't come up with 3, come up with your number 1. So again, if you could just review, Kay, your top 3 so that can get people's minds going there.
Yeah.
You had empathy first.
Open-mindedness and curiosity.
Great. Okay, so if you're here today, we want to hear from you. What are your top 3 essential skills, soft skills? Well, and of course, soft skills are these days transferring into, hard skills or just coming out and to be more intentional and maybe even more important. We want to hear from you. So we have, curiosity, empathy, and courage. We have empathy. Yes, and Jose says, when will we start calling these power skills? Okay.
Yeah. And by the way, courage is a critical one. One of the 6 traits of an inclusive leader is courage, but with humility. Courage with humility.
Absolutely. And I love that you highlighted, not to be curious from this, clinical stance. I mean, I definitely can attest. I've felt like that on the receiving end. It's like, it becomes like you are objectifying me, and it's like, but I'm a human, and so just to be on that foundation of, we are human. How can we connect with each other from the heart? And so what that means is we both have to open up to a certain extent, and that is difficult. But I think that, more and more we're being asked to take that challenge, and hopefully we can evolve as you said, our brains are ready to take that challenge. And so we just have to push it in that direction. So thank you so much. Yeah. All right. We have another: curiosity, vulnerability, and empathy. Great. These are great power skills that we're calling out here.
And vulnerability, if I just may mention, Marika mentioned, it's so important, that vulnerability, because when one is vulnerable, one invites in. Vulnerability is being prepared to perhaps make mistakes. And, bringing yourself to the table. And there's that beautiful comment which says, it is when you step into your light that you invite others to step into theirs. But when you step into your vulnerability, so too do you invite others to step into their vulnerability. And so it is a critical one.
Beautiful, beautifully said. Thank you for sharing that. All right. So would anyone else like to hop off mute and voice a question or reflection before I move on to the next question? I will hold for a light pause. And if you'd like to hop off mute, now is your time to shine. If not, I've got more questions, so don't worry. But I like to give the space for folks to have that invitation. All right, I'll be doing another one before we wrap up. That we have a little over 15 minutes. I told you all that time would fly. All right, so this next question reads, how can we work towards inclusive leadership when our own supervisors or companies aren't interested in the subject? So this question was submitted previous. I'm going to add to that. And if they are interested only on the performative level, what do you do?
So this is a good question, because it is at the heart of so much frustration and often anxiety, because there is something very conflictual for all of us. It takes away our integrity when we're being asked to do something that we can see that our leaders actually don't believe in. And so I'm going to give a few tips. The first thing that I would say, it is very much about numbers. So what you need to do is find allies, communities, others, and build a community who are passionate about diversity, who creates a sense of belonging. Because what will happen is when you connect your voice with others who have the same voice and belief and will, it becomes powerful. It can't be neglected. Number two, and this is something that really has worked. I worked with a group who were so dedicated to diversity, and they saw that their leaders weren't. And I said, so what catches your leaders' attention? And they said data. And I said, so what is the biggest barrier at the moment? And they're saying, well, actually, the leader says it's all okay. So I said, well, why don't you create a pulse survey around the feeling of inclusiveness? How important is diversity? Is there a sense that diversity is important for the organization? If there was one thing that the leadership could do, what would it be? And they gathered data. And what they did is go to the leadership and say, look, we are very much focused on diversity. We have a sense that you're not, but could we please share what the organization is saying? And they started talking about these things. And in fact, they got the attention, because this leadership of this organization simply wanted data, and then they would react to it. The next thing that I would say, and I'm once again using some examples from organizations that I've served, is what sometimes people have done is around celebratory events that occur, whether it's Cultural Diversity Day or International Day, and often leaders feel a responsibility to be there. They would ask speakers to come in to really speak about the subject, because they had the audience, and you would see that the leaders were being educated, and suddenly the penny would drop why they need to do more and lean in. And the other thing that I would say is I've never seen an organization where all the leaders do not care. There are always one or two who are a little bit on the fence and would like to do more. So look very carefully for those leaders and try to make them allies and invite them in and allow them to be a voice for what is occurring on with your community. So these are just some examples that can be done.
Great. Thank you for bringing those examples to the table. And yes, it's kind of like, the ones that are on the fence, because in that example of, you might have some leaders who are, maybe they are, for some reason, they are silent. There could be lots of different reasons. And so they need that encouragement to speak up, or, to show that they do care in other ways, so that maybe that opens up, a whole new can of worms that no one was expecting. And it just really takes trust and trusting ourselves and taking that leap of faith. I have a private question here that I'm going to raise now. I came from a nonprofit, and empathy is one of our core values. I recently joined a for-profit, which is predominantly white male, and I'm having a challenge to get them to understand why empathy is so important, even after I use what ifs. Do you have any suggestions or comments for this person?
in terms of empathy. Yes. Here, my research in neuroscience is helpful, and I take it directly to leaders when I talk about empathy. And so I will give the answer, because for empathy, many people think it's quite a soft skill. We've said it is a power skill, actually. But why is it so important to learn about how to be empathetic? And from a neuroscience perspective, what happens is, and I'll give a little bit of a biology answer, is that within our reptilian brain, it's all about survival. And what we're wanting to do is quickly identify with people that we trust and pretty much keep people that we don't trust, who are not in our in-group, out. Now, what Professor Moss Rackerson, who is a foremost researcher in terms of what can you really do to overcome bias, actually she says that the answer is empathy. Empathy means that someone who is in an out group moves into the in group. So what happens with empathy is when you start looking at someone and you see the whole person and you see their humanity and you're curious about their life and who they are, you start building connections to yourself. They move from the out group to the in group because you connect to them as a person. You aren't able to move someone from an out group into an in group without empathy. And so when leaders speak to me and say, you know, I'm being talked about empathy and why is it so important, I say it is a fundamental fodder for equity, for inclusion. Because if you don't have it, you're not able to invite people from groups that you don't regard as your own in. And so I really give quite a academic research-based answer. And then they say, oh, I understand that. And empathy, as we say, is very connected with curiosity, interest, speaking, dialogue. And these are all things that are part of an inclusive environment.
You know what's great? When you first started to speak about empathy in the beginning of this chat, I drew a direct line and wrote equity, because as you were explaining, you know, the importance of empathy and how, you know, how we can use that to our benefit and to create more inclusivity, equity automatically comes with that, in my opinion. I mean, that's why I did that direct line. I would love to hear you rant a little bit more about that. You kind of also just alluded to that, but this, you know, this in the workspace, in the workforce, I should say, these past years, you know, diversity, equity, inclusion is getting a lot of buzz. And so of course, with that comes a lot of performance, you know, allyship and, you know, let's even say like stock images. So people make you think that they are, you know, doing what their new, you know, revamped values on their website is showing, but they're not really practicing that inside of the company. And then, but you see people either leaving the company or, you know, a lot of whistleblowers are coming out these days saying that, you know, equity is not being practiced. And then you look at the company and you see, well, they're not really practicing empathy. So there's like, and from my understanding, there's a direct connection of empathy and equity. And so I don't know, I made that direct kind of connection, and you're speaking about it now. So it's hard for people who aren't practicing empathy to build a practice of empathy as a leader, but it's like the easiest solution to create equity. And so why is there this push and pull? And what do we need? I mean, this is a bigger conversation. But I love that you are directing, you know, you're building that bridge from empathy to equity in your reflection. So thank you so much, Kay, for that.
Thank you.
All right. So I told you all that time would fly. We've got about 9 minutes left. Would anyone like to hop off mute and ask a question or voice a reflection? If so, now's your time to shine. I'm going to hold here for a light pause to see if someone wants to take the opportunity. All right. All right. If not, I've got more questions. Don't worry. Okay. So this question is related to your previous response here. How do you help leaders understand how to leverage their resources and become allies when they're part of the dominant social group?
So what is important in terms of allies, and once again, what you'll see that I keep doing is to find out how can we define so that we've got the same language. But when we look at allyship, we need to understand that it's a lifelong process of building relations based on trust, consistency, accountability for underrepresented groups, and that there are a number of things to be done. So in terms of allies, what they need to do is, in order to even play the role, they need to educate themselves. They need to be aware of their privilege. They need to accept feedback. They need to bring diversity to the table. If they see something that is out of hand, they need to say something. It's actually leaning in. That is allyship. And if I could just confirm with you, your question, Mary L, is how they can use their resources better?
Yes. So how can they leverage their resources and become allies when they are part of the dominant social group is what this question reads.
Okay. Well, at a moment that an ally is clear about some of the privileges and also the power that they have, and also understand that this privilege and power is not shared by everyone, it gives the way that they can support. So, for example, one of the resources that they can leverage is their network. So when someone comes into an organization, they can say, welcome, let me introduce you to these networks and these people who can show you the ropes, who can invite you in, etc. The next thing is a biggest resource of an ally is time. It's saying, count on me to give you a disproportionate amount of my time to ensure that you're successful as you venture into the organization. Feel that you can come to me. So a resource that an ally can give is time. Another resource that an ally can give is actually investment. This is important to me in my business unit. What I'm going to be ensuring is that we've got a budget available that allows people to be successful. Another one is development. You know, often when I look at organizations in terms of strategic development of people, there is research that shows that most of the allocation on development is top down from the vantage point, what do I think is important? But it's not usually what is important really for underrepresented groups. So it is about saying, I have investment, let me now go to the underrepresented groups and understand what is important, valuable, and let me reallocate budget in that way. So actually an ally is about doing stuff. It's not just talking. And it is thinking about resources that are available and how you can allocate those resources and leverage it to create a platform to be successful.
Wow, spot on. I love it. And actually, this is great because when you're speaking about development, it's like a two-way street, right? Historically speaking, it's like, it comes from the top down. It comes from the one that is conquering, who has, the whatever kind of power is going to be more dominant in that culture. And they are able to, quote, develop that culture. But I love that you are referring to, the two-way street of development. So instead of just, what I think is right and you need to learn this, it's like, what can I learn from you? And how can we keep this flowing in a mutual way? Because at the end of the day, it's a partnership. Someone is working with you or in your community, and the community can be, successful however you determine and define success based on that interconnection, right? It's not just listening to someone tell you what to do based on their belief systems. It's always, in my opinion, recalibrating. Every day is different. We're changing all the time. And as we've seen in this, this past couple of years, lots of things are changing. And so resilience can help us open up some doors. I'd love to hear you speak a little bit about resiliency and how we can, maybe walk into this new year with more intention and awareness as we are putting on this new skin of leadership. And in my opinion, we're all leaders. You don't need the title to be a leader. What you decide to do in your day-to-day life has influence on a lot of things. So how can we embrace that part of us moving into this new year with intention, hopefully with grace, with all of these power skills that you mentioned before. We've got about 3 minutes left. So I just love for you to encourage us to think differently as we move into this new year.
So thank you so much. What I would say, and I so believe in it, is, diversity and inclusion is not about others alone. It is about ourselves. It is when you acknowledge why your diversity, your identity, why inclusion for you is important, that you're empathetic, why it is important for others. And we look at diversity, unfortunately, too much as a project and too much as a brain, in a straight line. What I would say to leaders, for every single person on this call, is look at diversity with your brain, with your heart, with your will, and set an intention to be an inclusive leader. Because as an executive coach, as well as a researcher, what I see is that when someone sets an intention, even if it is, from now on, I will never let a situation pass that is discriminatory or biased without leaning in and with humility and grace, creating a new perception, it won't occur. But if you say it, it will. And I want to say, Marie-Ella, how thankful I am for your leadership and your grace and your wisdom for bringing us together around this very, very important area.
Thank you so much, Kay. It's been such a pleasure and honor to hear you speak to this topic. As you said before we kicked off the session, that you could speak for days about this, and clearly, we can see you have a lot to say and a lot of resources to share. So I do recommend folks reaching out to Kay if you do want to continue to pick her brain and support the work that she's doing, so that we can all come together. I mean, we have a really big opportunity to make some big changes and be the change that we want to see. Kay, I if you see that in me, we are marrying each other. And so I want to say thank you for your leadership and for sharing your voice the way that you are with us. Take care, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this call. Enjoy your next transition into the new year. And remember, let's be the change that we want to see. Thank you, Kay, so much. I appreciate your words today. And have a good day.
Namaste.
Namaste.